Yeah. Yeah. Good evening, council members and officers. Yeah. Come to this meeting. This is our first meeting for a scrutiny panel for crime and disorder committee. This is a hybrid meeting. This is conducted in this Cantle Room at Ealing Town Hall. There should be a minimum of 3 members in the room to for it to be quorate, and we are. So we're fine on that. And some can join via Zoom as well. Members attending virtually can speak through the chair, but would not be able to vote. Should there be, if there's any vote on anything. Speak. Yeah, all attendees should they wish to speak in a meeting. They go through the chair. They should speak through the chair and one at a time. Agenda papers are accessible online with this link. Agenda Scrutiny Panel 4, Crime and Disorder, on moderngov.co.uk. And we have Metropolitan Police officer attending, Superintendent Sean Lynch, and service officers Nick Fielder, the Strategic Director for Housing and Environment, Jess Murray, Assistant Director for Safer Communities. So Paul Murphy, Head of Community Safety. Start meeting. Any apologies for absence? No,
yeah, I have a late apology from Councillor Anand, Praveen Anand.
Thank you. Any other apologies? Yeah.
No,
Any urgent matters?
no.
Yeah. Matters to be considered in private?
There.
No. Yeah. Okay. Declaration of interest. No. Okay. Now that's item 5 is panel operations. That's panelists to consider and agree terms of reference and our work program. I suppose terms of reference in Appendix 1 has been seen, Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. Do we agree? Terms of reference, yeah. And with the work program on Appendix 3, and we agree with that. Okay, yes, thank you. On item 6 now, the Metropolitan Police Service Trust and Metropolitan Police Service Trust and Confidence 2020 turnaround plan. Police Officer Superintendent Sean Lynch will be presenting it. We'll be, if we're doing the listening today, and if we can ask questions should any questions arise. This meeting will be over two meetings, be linked to the next meeting that's on 31st of October. So, there will some on this one. We are not making any recommendation. That's when we will be making recommendations on our second meeting. That's after some field work. So Any questions so far? Okay, over to you, Superintendent Sean Lynch. Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much. Thank you, councillor members of the scrutiny panel. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. So I'm Sean Lynch. I'm the new neighbourhood superintendent for Ealing Borough. So now you have a superintendent that is responsible for each borough on this command unit. So you have one for Hillingdon, one for Hounslow, and I'm the lead now for Ealing, and it's my pleasure to be here. So tonight, if you permit, I will take you through elements of what we already know to be the turnaround plan, but I'm going to defer, first of all, I think, to Jess to my left. So you might want to set the context, a little bit more of the scenery before I continue, if you permit me to.
Thanks, Sean. So, so in terms of the context of the conversation, I think Sean Wilson, who's the borough commander, I had flagged the fact that there is a turnaround plan. Oh, what can I put right in? So just so in the context of the pre-agenda meeting we had a conversation about how we communicate the turnaround plan and work with our police colleagues to give councillors as representatives of our local communities the opportunity to explore with the police the turnaround plan and find out how locally that can be brought forward, but also give the police the opportunity to engage with elected members and get feedback on that plan. And also, you know, get some more assistance in terms of working out the most appropriate way to engage with our local communities, which of course councillors and members understand locally. So the approach, I suppose, is for Sean today to talk through the plan and give you guys a clear steer on what that work looks like, and what the direction is in terms of the wider Met approach, but then also how he foresees that working with Paul and myself and the rest of the team in terms of rolling out that engagement with our communities, to make sure you guys have a really clear understanding and have an opportunity to work through the key points in that plan and get a very clear view on what that looks like, which will then enable you to then, when you do your field work and other observations, come back with some really clear recommendations and support to make sure we can assist the local police to land this really well with local residents and make sure it makes as big an impact as possible. So I think that's how we're planning to take it forward. So I think I'll hand back to Sean just to work through the presentation with you guys. But if there's any questions or any issues, of course, Paul and I can assist and jump in where appropriate as well.
Thanks, Jess. And just a little bit more context, I suppose, to set the scene. I've joined the command unit and been the Ealing superintendent since May. So what you see here today is the latest version of the new Met for London plan. So I formerly worked at North West London. So I was involved in the consultation and various other events in Harrow, Barnet and Brent. And there has been a time span whereby you would have probably engaged with my predecessor, Superintendent Anthony Bennett, who's now got responsibility for Hillingdon Borough. So, yeah, sorry, I'll put.
I wonder if is it possible for you to, you may be getting to this anyway, but just to explain the structure of, because we were in a sort of three borough structure, you know, unit, weren't we? And now we've gone back to sort of borough policing, or I don't know if you can explain how that's worked.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think Paul's going to pull up a slide. I think he's got some element which
bear
might...
with me 2 moments. I have got a slide that I can show on that just to help guide the conversation a little bit. Give us 2 moments, sorry.
So while Paul finds that, so the basic command unit structure still remains. One of the first, I suppose, signal decisions of the commissioner on coming back into post last September was to define and call out neighbourhood policing as a priority. So Paul Paul's put the visual up for those that are online and for us in the room here, so you can see what the latest structure looks like. There is a subsection to this, which I'll explain. So Sean Wilson has already been mentioned, continues to be the basic command unit borough commander, who oversees all of the strands and is my line manager. Sean's got responsibility for Ealing, Hillingdon and Hounslow around all policing operations and responds to and reports to the area link commander. Locally, we are still structured exactly as we were. You have a superintendent responsible for response policing across the 3 boroughs. You have a superintendent, a detective superintendent responsible for local investigations, which is effectively our criminal investigation department. You have a detective superintendent that's responsible for public protection matters. And then we have our own internal superintendent who effectively acts as our HQ quartermaster, I suppose, around how we function across all the other strands. I've deliberately left neighbourhoods to the end because historically, and under the old model, you had one superintendent traversing all 3 boroughs. You now have one dedicated superintendent covering each specific borough. And of course, I am pleased to be here as the Ealing superintendent. Anthony has moved. Anthony is now the Hillingdon superintendent, and Anil is the new superintendent that started at Hounslow at the same time as I did. So you've got a local senior leadership team of 7 superintendents where you used to have just 5. So there's been an increase. Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you. Shall I continue? Is that okay? So yeah, so the context being I've been here since May. The turnaround plan and various iterations of what that looked like has evolved in that time over the last couple of months. Over 10,000 people have given feedback and consultation. And prior to my arrival here at Ealing, colleagues around this room and also in the community would have fed back across what the original plan was for Ealing. What I'm going to present today is the latest iteration of what the new Met for London looks like. So this is a combination of the turnaround plan as we set out, the feedback from the consultation, which has had at least 10,000 respondents come back to us. It's also in direct response to the Casey review from Baroness Casey, of which I'm sure many of you have read the 356-page document. And also it encompasses a large degree of recommendations which are outstanding from the HMIC FRS, of which you see in the annex at the back of this document as well. It's an 80-page document. If you haven't had the opportunity, I know we've all got busy lives. I would encourage you to scan it, read it, have a look. It's not that heavy. What I'm going to give to you today in terms of the presentation are some of the headlines. Clearly, I'll talk through as much detail as I possibly can that I know locally and what that looks like for Ealing. And of course, I'll take as many questions as possible about what the next couple of years will look like under the new Met for London vision that's been set out by the Commissioner. Just before I pause and go into the presentation, as a result of the launch of the new Met for London, the Commissioner and Management Board have made a commitment to come out to every single borough to launch this document and take questions personally. So tonight sees the first event that's happening in West Area Command at Hillingdon. And this Friday, we see the second event that's happening in Hounslow. And then on the 8th of August, we'll have the opportunity here. Hopefully many of you will be able to join me, a member of Management Board, and also the senior leadership team to discuss this plan in a bit more detail alongside all the other people that have already registered on our Eventbrite. A bit later as well, we can circulate it, I think, with the papers. I've got the details for how you can gain access to the event, which is an Eventbrite only, and I believe you've already received invitations for that. So I'd encourage you to come along. I look forward to seeing you on the 8th. So this is the start point, I suppose, of lots of dialogue and communication about what the new Met for London looks like. Okay, so I'll go into the slides, and by all means, Chair, as questions come up, I'll pause. Sorry, did you have a question, Chair? Apologies, you paused. Right, thank you. Okay, fine. So there's again, the broader detail clearly is in this document. I'm going to give you some headlines, and I'll take you through what the new Met for London is trying to achieve. So we've got three main priorities and areas which the Commissioner has called out, of which we need to spend all of our focus. The first element the Commissioner has called out is community crime fighting and putting communities first. And I'll talk about some underlying principles as well, which the Commissioner has highlighted, which we will adopt going forward as well, which dovetail with the priorities that were on the screen. So you're probably thinking, well, what does community crime fighting look like now? What's going to be different? All of those questions will no doubt be going through your head about what does that visibly and tangibly look like for Ealing at the moment, and what am I going to see in the next couple of years? There are elements within the plan the Commissioner calls out about being more precise in our approach to community crime fighting, and effectively giving Londoners the voice that they need to support us in how we tackle local crime and antisocial behaviour. That was a huge part of the Baroness Casey review in terms of Londoners' lost voices. So a real emphasis on a lot more community engagement, a lot more ward panel involvement, an awful lot more of local priority setting with our community and stakeholders, including all of you, of course, going forward, and tangibly making a difference around certain crime types, which I'll call out a little bit later, which the Commissioner wants to have more focus on in a neighbourhood setting. The second, and it's in the middle, deliberately, I suppose, just in terms of the culture change and challenge within the organisation. I think personally, as I've already reported back to other forums within Ealing, the Baroness Casey review, having personally met Baroness Casey on a number of occasions and formed part of that review, and having read the report and digested it, like many of you, I'm sure, that was an incredibly difficult and challenging read as an individual who has served in the Met Police for 25 years. What is absolutely unequivocally not being challenged by the Commissioner is that he and Management Board and everyone that serves in the organisation is accepting all of the recommendations within the Baroness Casey review. And within that, and already there's been a long course of action that started from September last year when Commissioner took post around changing the culture in the organisation and really drilling into the professional standards of the organisation, what that looks like for officers that serve and staff that serve within the organisation, but also our operational delivery in terms of the standards that you can expect of police officers when you call upon us around our core principles around preventing crime and basically saving life. The other element that Commissioner calls out, and this is why I would stress now around the new Met for London plan, around some of the terminology that's used around the scale and maybe the pace of which the Commissioner wants and also realises is necessary in terms of fixing the foundations of the organisation, is going to be very difficult and very challenging, and it is something personally that I already have inner conflict with in terms of fixing what's happened over the last 5-10 years in the organisation and what's required to make sure that it's fit for purpose. You know, and then we start to get into some of the practical elements around equipment, kit, where officers are, police stations, what the service looks like for victims of crime if they were to come into a police station. Really drilling into a lot of the detail, budget allocations, how many response vehicles we have. There's so much granular detail that goes into fixing the foundations. But again, hopefully during this presentation, I'll be able to elicit some of those other elements and points, which I'm sure will be parts of your discussion, and also what you've witnessed and seen and lived yourselves as well, whilst being elected leads here in Ealing. Next slide, please. So the first point, first element, obviously, I'll focus on. All I've done here is draw out some of the headlines around community crime fighting. Some of these are enablers, but equally some of them are challenges. I think it's well recognised as part of the National Uplift Programme that the Metropolitan Police is finding it, for a number of reasons, incredibly challenging to maintain its officer numbers. It's documented and recognised. It's recognised and documented in here that we are circa 1,000 officers short of where we need to be in terms of our recruitment targets. Within the cultural element of recruitment, clearly the Met needs to be more diverse and more representative of the communities that it serves. And whilst we are seeing progress, and I've been pleased to report back to various forums already since being here, at the Safer Neighbourhood Board and the local IAG, we still need to make a massive step change in terms of that recruitment drive. There are elements of policy and procedure that certainly help with that, which the Commissioner calls out within the document, like stipulating that you need to be a resident of London, which will certainly help us with diversity. But unfortunately, there are a number of other factors that at the moment don't enable the Commissioner to be able to make that decision. Although I do think that is on the horizon and the Commissioner calls that out. And personally, I think it's a real step forward in the organisation to try to recruit locally, more locally, from the communities that are there to serve us, because it does, in my personal experience, give a much better service when you're invested in the local communities that you police and you work at and in. Having spent much of my time in North West London, I can certainly be an advocate for that going forward. We already have a significant amount of work that happens in the communities locally, and I see regularly outreach meetings within our local outreach teams where they're working with local leaders, faith communities and other organisations to try to generate momentum around people coming through into the police service, where we actively recruit and track and support them through their journey to make them functioning constables. There are other elements, of course, which the Commissioner calls out, which are more policy driven, around cost of living, around start pay, the competitive rates, never mind, you know, the elephant in the room in terms of what's been happening in the organisation and the culture and the standards and the perception of the organisation as a safe and diverse and welcoming, inclusive employer. So all of that is called out in the document. I think it's very well recognised. So recruitment continues to be a real focus. We've all got responsibility locally for that, including warranted officers, also volunteers and special constabulary as well, which was my pathway into the organisation years ago. Another element around community crime fighting, which I think will really help the organisation, especially the area of work which I have responsibility for around neighbourhood policing, is the availability of the local officers. Now, time and time again, I will go to public meetings and be held to account around where are my local designated ward officers, where are my local PCSOs, where is my local town centre team officer. And there is a commitment from the Commissioner in terms of protecting officers within a community setting to make sure that they are more readily available and working the hours that they should be. And that is a challenge. And I see that already at Ealing personally, in terms of the conversations I have and what I see in terms of commitments for officers having to go up to central London to work on aid and big ceremonial events, for example, but also officers having to move across borders. So availability of neighbourhood officers in particular is something the Commissioner is very keen to drill into. And there are commitments, which we'll go into a bit later, about what minimum officers numbers will look like on wards. Proactive policing. Now, the visual that Paul gave you, where you can see, you know, how we're divided into 5 local kind of, I suppose, teams that all traverse and work collaboratively together at the police station. Proactive policing is a responsibility across a number of strands, whether you're a response officer that may be working a night duty in Ealing tonight, to go to vulnerable hotspots or areas where you know there's likely to be criminality, to officers that maybe respond to someone who's been arrested for an acquisitive crime, and as a result they do some reactionary work obviously to investigate that crime and bring that offender to justice, supporting vulnerable victims. Neighbourhoods, the strand that I have responsibility for, obviously having that community focus, are a big part, have a massive part to play in terms of that proactive policing, community crime fighting, intelligence gathering, being visible, being present. Cops on dots, I suppose, is some terminology around, you know, the impact that that has, the safety element that people get from seeing visible officers out on the street, you know, in high footfall areas. The preventative work and the proactive work that neighbourhood officers can do around problem solving, working with our council partners, you know, location-based work. There's lots there within the plan, which is part of the proactive policing. And the Commission's commitment is to look at some of our pressure posts, which have been created over the last number of years, to try to bring more people back to the front line. So the first initial offer, I think, which is documented here, is about 240 officers coming back to the front line to work in proactive policing. I fully expect that that number will increase, but that's the initial element that the Commissioner is looking at. And I'm already seeing a proactive review internally, which is doing just that. As an organisation, we've had a huge focus on violence under the previous Commissioner, but that commitment still continues. But some of the work that we're seeing is actually moving some of the officers that have been working in some of our violent crime task force out towards our frontline policing. Locally, within my sphere of influence, I already have a neighbourhood tasking team which will work collaboratively with the proactive teams based from Southall. So a real emphasis around proactive and offender focus. Real-time data, I think this is something which, well, depends on whether you're analytical, whether you like data, or whether you struggle with it. I think there's a balance to be struck within the organisation. We have to use precision data. We need to know that we need to be going to the hotspots where the challenges are. We need to use it carefully and effectively. It can be quite emotive. I've been in other forums where people have spoken about data being a little bit cold and not really being a community focus and not really being receptive to the needs of the local community. What I would say is, I think the Commissioner's commitment is to enabling officers to have better access to fast-time information so that they can make more informed decisions. And there are references within this document to some of the technology which I'm familiar with. A particular system I've already referenced before called Met Insights, which does that locally for neighbourhood officers. So that's, and there's also significant change programs happening within the Met Police around how we use our data and also the systems that we harvest and use to capture crime and antisocial behaviour data, which is ongoing, big change programs. Leading into command and control, which is another big change program. It's recognised that we've seen a huge increase in our volume. In the last 12 months, we're seeing a 25% increase in calls to police, which naturally, with the resource structures that we have and the current workforce that we have, puts extra strain on our officers, and equally has a knock-on consequence around our budget and our expenditure. But yeah, the levels of calls that we are receiving through our 3 call centres at the moment is 25% up, which is huge. Significant demands. And that's also, I suppose, a reflection of how we are changing our, we've had this conversation in other forums around our accessibility. So online reporting, web chats, and using different other access to report crimes, as well as calling to police on 999 or 101. Dovetailed to the community crime fighting and the work that I do within the neighbourhood setting is the commitment from the Commissioner around a significant focus and uplift in public protection. And they quote within the document the uplift of 565 posts, officers, to work towards predatory offending, localised harm, and working in the public protection setting. So that's child abuse investigation and other elements of adult safeguarding. So significant uplift coming across London over the next 2 years under public protection. And they work really closely already, the public protection teams with the local neighbourhood officers already. So I see that being an absolute added advantage to me as a neighbourhood superintendent in Ealing locally. And then something which I'll reference now, but I know that there's more coming this week in terms of a little more narrative and engagement and release around the right care, right person, which I know is causing genuine concern and anxiety within many partnerships across London, which is the Commissioner's direction utilising the Humberside model, whereby we will change our approach to how we manage and deal with vulnerable adults and children in a mental health setting. So there's a lot of negotiation and conversations already happening with trusts locally and across London. And that piece of work is a real statement case, I suppose, from the Commissioner about trying to get back to basics about what policing and officers and staff should be focusing their efforts on based upon the skill sets that they have And the Commissioner's outlook is clearly right person to give the right care. And, you know, we all know how challenging it is dealing with people who are going through mental health crisis and challenges in the community and that knock-on effect. So lots of work's already happened about that. That's a huge, significant piece of work that's ongoing. Okay, so underpinning sort of the crime fighting element, and they'll come on to bits in a minute in terms of the other slides, which I'll present tonight. I've talked about the change in values and principles. There is a slide that talks about our values, what the new values look like for the organisation, and also the guiding principles the Commissioner expects everyone in the organisation to adopt, which for me are common sense, and also what we should be doing, what we've always been doing in my mind, and how I conduct myself, and I expect my officers to locally. The cultural challenges we've talked about, we will go into a bit more detail, I'm sure, during the course of these sessions, and of course when we do elements of the scrutiny, and maybe perhaps when you come out and see some of the work that we're doing, you get to understand and you can ask questions of officers about what that looks like in the organisation to get a look and feel. Discrimination and the use of powers and policies, how the police, you know, what that looks like in terms of use of force, stop and search, representation, disproportionality. Absolutely, we know is a key priority. Whilst it's not in my slide deck, there are lots of other parallel areas of work which are happening at the moment. The Race Action Plan, Stop and Search Charter, lots of work that's ongoing at the moment, linked to outreach and diversity and what the organisation looks like going forward over the next 2 years and beyond, I'm sure, with a 10-year plan. And then, of course, stop and search is called out principally as well. It's such an emotive subject, such a powerful power, such an invasive power, but such an invaluable use of powers, if I'm honest, as a police officer, to protect, to take serious offensive items, in particular knives, zombie knives, weapons off the streets. But it needs to be conducted professionally, ethically. And whilst it's called out some of the terminology in the new Met for London, I've previously talked in other forums about quality of encounters and what that looks like. And I'm pleased to see that that gets referenced in here as well around how we conduct stop search. So a bit smaller. This will challenge my my 2020 vision with my new glasses. But I'll have to lean over a little bit to have a little look. So here we are. So we've got the values and the guiding principles the Commissioner has set for the organisation. So the principles first. And of course, as I've said to you, I'll draw you back to my opening statement. This is in response to a myriad of reports, Baroness Casey, inspections, various other reviews, inquiries that are happening across policing, undercover policing inquiry, many others, and of course our response to various communities and incidents, significant incidents going back 20 years. So if you can factor all of that in and think about these guiding principles, and I'll stop in a minute and just pause and reflect and ask your view about whether or not you feel as though those are the right principles that we should be adopting as an organisation. So communities first. Pelian principles, policing by consent. It's everything I've ever known as a police officer in the Met Police and in my entire life about how communities always come first and what policing should look like. And it's really nice and pleasing to see that there is that element and that focus from the Commissioner highlighting the importance of it. And we have a model which, as we know, isn't replicated across other parts of Europe or the world. Frontline policing focused. Now, as an officer that's worked predominantly frontline policing for most of my service, bar 3 years, I'm really pleased to see that that is the emphasis of the Commissioner, because we are an organisation of circa 33,000 officers and increasing. The percentage of those that are actually on frontline duties obviously needs to increase, and that is recognised by the Commissioner, which is what we're starting to see already with some of the changes that have taken place with the proactive review. So I'm really pleased to see that as a key focus point as a principle for the Commissioner going forward. Because I know that everyone here in this room wants to see more officers in the street and more visibility and greater coverage. Inclusivity, which for me is an absolute given. I suppose goes hand in hand with the collaboration as we are as an organisation and what that looks like with partners and stakeholders. We need to be an inclusive organisation. We are an inclusive organisation, but we need to open up our doors more. People need to understand and see the challenges that we face, but equally, as an organisation, be representative of the communities that we serve. And we've still got a long way to go, as I've already alluded to, but we are making progress. Obviously, the headline there is that we will be anti-discriminatory. You know, I suppose the challenge back to me is, well, are you not already that? And yes, we are. But of course, you've seen and you've read in various reports that the organisation and behaviours that are pervaded over the last number of years aren't always demonstrating that we are anti-discriminatory. Collaboration has been a big part of my service and continues to be so, and especially officers that work in my strand, my command. We can't do this without community members. We can't do this without you advocating, supporting, sponsoring, challenging us, and we can't do it with our statutory partners. And in the 2 months that I've been here, I honestly can say the partnership, Ealing Community Safety, and what I've experienced has been nothing but excellent in terms of the work, the responsiveness, the challenges that we face, and how we are all coming together as a collective team. And long may that continue locally. And then the precision element. Now, this is the element that the Commissioner is bringing in, which we've also seen with changes in management board, so that now we have senior members of management board that are not police officers, where they bring different outlooks, expertise, and technology and ideas. So we've got Professor Larry Sherman that is now on part of the management board team. So we're looking to be a lot more evidence-based in our focus, and we've lost one of our commanders who's just gone to another force on promotion, but he has been a big part of the evidence-based policing work. Mr. Murray, who's now in West Mercia Police, but that work continues, and there's lots of work and focus about how we can be more precise about our approach and the tactics that we use, what works well, what is evidence from other parts of the world and Europe. So I'm going to pause because I'm doing a lot of talking, and I just wanted to really, I suppose, throw over to you, Chair, and to panel members, what your views are on those guiding principles of the Met and what the Commissioner is setting out.
All right. Question, yep.
Thank you,
Councillor
Chair.
Flynn? Yeah.
Lovely, yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Superintendent. Very helpful to see it and get the update on all. I was just going to say I'm really glad to see kind of the inclusivity point and collaboration. As Jess will know, I was on the phone to him lately. We had there was a speeding incident on North Hamwell and Greenford Avenue, and we went around knocking doors and talking to people. And I suppose there's one of the things I picked up. We were there about one incident, but it started a wider conversation. And one of the big themes was people were like, it surprised me how proactive they were, and they wanted to help and play their part. And they were, I think we actually when we had addressed the issue, but it left us with a lot of food for thought on the ways we can work with kind of the community, to kind of strengthen the collaboration, because, people do want to play a really active part. So I just want to say really, really glad to see it there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've already revealed my journey to the police was as a voluntary officer for 3 years before I signed up. From college and other things. So just to get a flavour for what I thought were, I suppose, the principles of policing and whether or not it was something that was right for me. Volunteers, something that's really close to my heart, having done a national secondment where we were working with volunteers at the Prince's Trust to enable the delivery to happen. I think it's something that the Met is reinvigorating massively, and that community asset is something that, I think the Commissioner wants to reconnect with, which is why he's got the community first element coming out there. And that can be local speed watch, that can be accreditation, that can be doing things differently in your communities, because the police can't be there all the time. We know that. But if we are going to have increasing visibility, what else have we got that we can do that can make the place feel safer, safe havens, that sort of stuff, working with our council partners around the environment and CCTV and lighting, all the other elements that come with it. So to empower our communities to feel safer, and yeah, do the personal element, and it gets called out in the report. We are a very young workforce at the moment. I might not be, representative of what the workforce looks like at the moment, but we're evolving and changing, and we're losing lots of experience and expertise, and not everyone can talk like I can. Not everyone wants to engage with members of the community, and so, you know, aligned to our training and development work, giving our officers the skills and also the experience to be able to do just that would be great. What would be nice is to know that, you know, that's replicated by some of the officers that respond to incidents. They go out there and they don't just deal with something, they see something from a ward-based perspective, and they go and knock on doors to reassure or to explain, and also to maybe cover off other elements, you know, and I think that's where you get the more experienced officers will start to do that. But I think that gets called out as well. But yeah, communities first. And, you know, under an old iteration that we've had previously, it's around optimizing basically our communities to help. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's always interesting, even if I've seen a few things already. But of course, these principles are very important. I think they're all correct. There's just one niggling question in my mind. There's no principle here which actually is internally focused. They seem to be all like the problem is how we deal with public, but also how police officers deal with one another, especially when we talk about the cultural change, that their own collaborative working, their own acceptance of diversity, because we've heard about also the cultural problems inside. So do the same, or some of these, you know, kind of apply for the kind of workforce itself, because a cultural change, I guess, needs to start internally.
Yeah, of course. And without referencing the document too much, I think if you get to something like page 50 or 55, you start to get into some of the broader elements around what's already happened in terms of the culture and the changes that have happened locally within the Met Police in terms of zero tolerance, the increase in our professional standards department, the commissioner lobbying the Home Secretary around changing the police regulations to expedite officers which shouldn't be in the organisation. I think it gets referenced in the document that since the commissioner's taken post, there's been 57 misconduct hearings where officers have been expelled from the organisation, which is, you know, an exponential increase. I can't really stress, I mean, there's a right line telephone number externally now for members of the public to identify and call out inappropriate misconduct and poor behaviour. There's a real focus on emphasis on professional standards in the organisation and our code of conduct and what's expected of us. As an officer with more experience, sometimes I can understand where there is a conflict with some of the younger officers about how they come into conflict with the code of conduct, just around lifestyle choices. Notwithstanding that, naturally, when you take the oath and you have this warrant card, it's an entirely different position to be in than any other member of the public. And so, you know, there are other elements, of course, around the commissioner, around retaking the oath, and other elements just to re-emphasize to officers around the standards that are expected, which we're all expected to abide by on duty and off duty, more importantly as well off duty, because a lot of incidents happen where officers are actually off duty, where they come into conflict with standards and also use of their powers and authority. So there's a huge emphasis within the document around the culture, what we're trying to achieve, what the commissioner has already set out, and lots of work that will continue around that in terms of how we tackle discrimination. And I've alluded to it already, just in terms of some of the other policy changes that are happening around use of force, use of handcuffs, stop and search tactics. All of that has got an element of around standards, discriminatory practice, how we apply our powers and policies. So would happily take up another conversation with you around the standards, and also again, I'll open it up to the chair and also to all of you. Make the offer, obviously, when you come out, you might want to signal certain elements of work that you'd like to focus on, and professional standards is something that absolutely we can open our doors to, of course, and you can see some of the work that we do proactively.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation and the explanations of the other questions that were answered. My question is, as councillors, we have direct interaction with residents. We also, I'm sure I can speak for all councillors, we also get complaints about antisocial behavior, drug dealing in the aspects. How can we, as and we do get lots of support, both with the officers and with the police, but how can we actually work with you as councillors, because we have the direct interaction with the residents, to help you overcome some of the challenges that you are facing? How can we work with you on that? Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, excuse me. Thank you. Thanks for your question. Yeah. In my experience, I've always adopted the principle of, and it's called out, of course, in terms of that conduct and that contact you have regularly with your ward sergeants and also your officers. Now, you know, I've been here 2 months. I spent last Friday, I spent 2.5, 3 hours wandering around Hamwell, getting a look and feel and a flavour some of the incidents that I know are being raised locally around antisocial behaviour, street drinking and criminality. And my expectation, and also I think the expectation of the Commissioner going forward, isn't any different to what we've already and we should already have in place. And that is good dialogue, good communication. You should be able to know who your local ward officers are, how you can access them. The same goes for the sergeants, and so should all of the people and the communities that you serve within your respective wards. What can you do, I suppose, was your question, to like support, advocate, sponsor, lobby. I think for me, the important thing is that the dialogue continues and that we are candid. And I think that phrase gets used a lot by the Commissioner. And you know, accountability is something we'll go on to in a minute in terms of what that looks like. And here is living proof of accountability, making myself available and signing up to Scrutiny, which, if I'm honest, I don't think is the norm across London. But it's absolutely the right thing to do, to make sure that you know what we're doing and we can see what you're doing and advocating for. So whether that be ward panels, whether that be the Safer Neighbourhood Board, whether it be more community forums, whether it be the benchmark, I suppose, with the event on the 8th of August, of which we're going to be committing to 2 this year, and it'll be 4 next, where we can bring community members together to come forward and talk about all the issues of which should already be in our domain. And then working with our partners, making sure that we're responding to all of those. And there are other projects around communication, which the Met's piloting. There's something called Zen City, which is starting to roll out across London. We will be one of the sites at some point soon, which is rapid polling. So we get to understand and get a flavour for what the local community issues are and how we can respond to them quicker, rather than kind of, you said we did, in a slow time using newsletters. You know, let's move with the times and be a bit quicker. You know, let's respond to stuff that's on Twitter, or let's be proactive with the local media. So all of that space is where I'm taking my officers, and I think that's my interpretation of what the Commissioner wants as well. More responsive, a lot more conversation, and honest, candid conversation as well, just like this. You know, we can't always be there, but we've got to do our absolute best. And I think more importantly, and the point that I stressed to Jess and to Paul, and especially when incidents and events are brought to my attention, is that as elected leads and also community members, you need to know that we are listening, we are understanding, but we're responding, we're doing something about it, but we're giving you an explanation about what we're doing and why we are doing something, or why we can't do something perhaps, because I don't think that happens as much as it could do. And I think communication is a big part of that, with the community's first element. So more of this, I suppose. Sorry.
I was just going to add to that. I think we've had some conversations, certainly with the portfolio holder, around what the Safer Community Service can do to help councillors have better access and better kind of communication and build that relationship with the local ward teams more. So I think we're going to look to do some kind of introductory kind of events, but as we've done previously, some of you might recall, where we can introduce ward councillors to their local sergeants and officers, and also do a bit more work around promoting the ward panels and trying to get that better attended and make sure councillors are able to access that and things like that. So there's also the opportunity to raise issues with Paul and the Safer Communities team along with the local sergeant, so we can kind of work in collaboration with Sean's teams to solve local problems like you identified, ASB, drug dealing, some of those issues where we work in partnership. So I think there's a plan to try and build on that moving forward as part of the delivery of this plan. Thank you.
And just on that, and being really candid with you, in response to incidents locally, I share an element of frustration about maybe some of the systems and processes that we have. For example, officers seeking authority before they put out a press release around certain incidents or events that they're dealing with, when actually I'd much rather engage and have a conversation. And I'm trying to empower my inspectors, Lee in particular, Dinkesh and others within my command already, to get out front and centre about challenges or issues that are being raised in the right and professional way, but just so that people understand actually we are listening. We know that this is a problem. We're trying to do something about it. This is what we're doing. This is our response now. This is what our response will be in the medium term. And these are the partners that we're engaged who are ready to get stuff done. And actually, maybe the narrative that you're hearing and seeing isn't necessarily, you know, the true events that are taking place. So I'm really keen to make sure that we're a lot more proactive, I suppose, in that communication space, which is one of the reasons why I was definitely out in Hanwell last week, because I wanted to make sure that I saw it myself as to what I was hearing and seeing on social media.
Councillor Kwanzaa.
Thank you for a very nice report, Superintendent Sean. I was going to ask a couple of questions. A lot of the themes that were pointed to earlier on, they're interconnected. And when you talk, for example, about data, there's going to be a change in how data is going to be used. I'm interested in that because it's a double-edged sword. And with data, we have, of course, profiling, and there's young people, not just young people, who are worried about how data is used upon them. So I'd like you to elaborate on that. And secondly, with regards to, for example, recruitment and the challenges you face, and I know that there's a lot more that can be done, just this is a pure observational point. When you're rotating to the different panels, I mean, with the greatest respect, I see 3 white men and I'm a black woman. So how are you going to address this? Because it starts also with seeing is believing. Thank you very much.
So I'll address both points. Thank you for your questions. So firstly, the data element, I understand. I totally understand concerns that people have around use of data. And obviously it is referenced in the report by the Commissioner, and we all know long-standing issues around how we've utilised data, as you've called out there, principally around how we're tackling gangs and youth violence, which I think is very well recognised and documented. We are using different approaches around using the Cambridge Harm Index, which I'm sure you're familiar with as well, which gives a score rating based upon just that in terms of vulnerability and harm, which I think is very much the approach the Met Police should be taking. And we can take that alongside our emphasis and focus around uplifting in public protection and working with our partners around the table in various statutory forums. So I think that's a really good move, so that there is more emphasis on the vulnerable and also vulnerable communities, whether that be modern slavery, whether it be manifesting itself in cuckooing or anything else. And that's front and centre where neighbourhood policing should be as well, by the way. I absolutely take your point about representation. You know, it's not lost on me that I am a 49-year-old white man as a superintendent. But what I will say is my team and my local teams are very diverse already. You know, just within my very small team, you know, I've got an inspector of Asian heritage. I've got a female inspector and local leader who has got dual nationality. And I do see the organisation and the Met Police having a much better gender balance already. And I think that gets played out in the report in terms of the percentage of female officers that we have in the organisation. But there's lots to be done, naturally. There are lots of programmes and schemes, and if that would be an element of interest for you, when we get to the next element of scrutiny, and I can introduce you to one of my colleagues called Gani, who works in our Learning and Development Department, around how we support, nurture and develop officers within the organisation with different opportunities and different skill sets, but to nurture more representation in the senior ranks, for example. And it is a question that comes up. I was pleased to be able to host another forum, a colleague of mine, who is one of the most senior officers in the Met, who's leading on the race action plan. And he talks really candidly about this issue personally as a Black officer, with more service to me, about what he sees in the community and also his experiences in the Met. So he may be someone I could introduce you to as well as part of that next stage of that work. And he'll be able to talk about what we're doing around recruitment, representation and outreach, which is really good. He came to my local and my first independent advisory group meeting here. He gave a really strong presentation. His name's Jeff Booth. But yeah, I absolutely take your point.
Good. Just on the, just a really quick one in terms of combination and everything, pick up on two of your questions, because you picked up on the data and the double-edged sword that data is, and then we talked about the inclusivity aspect as well. And I think if we, and this is where our job, your job, I suppose, to holding the police to account, but the use of data around can be possibly one of the most useful things in that space, because we're talking about stop and search data, looking at disproportionality, but also increasingly thinking about in the own work that we respond to in the council as well, like which communities are most affected by which issues. Is there a disproportionate amount of people of a certain background represented as victims of specific crime types? Why is that? Might that go some way to explaining why people within those communities feel that they're underprotected by us? They might feel less comfortable in coming to us. And what can we then do using that data to project a better image of us, but also to fight those crimes and to approach those victims better, I suppose, as well. So I suppose that's the test, is really that use of the data, I suppose.
Just to follow up on that, and I know it is referenced in the new Met of London, in terms of the training element that the Commissioner calls out, Leadership Academy and the skills the officers have. I think data is useful if you can interpret it and you can understand it. And so data literacy skills, I know, is something that Met is investing in, just in terms of, well, actually, what does this mean? But yeah, I mean, I won't dwell on it again, but yeah, the race action plan and various other elements about how we use our powers and the disproportionality conversation is absolutely happening in other forums that I'm already a member of, especially around stop and search. And I sit on the stop and search gold group for London. So. Thank you, Chair. Shall I continue with the kind of values element?
So I've got a couple of questions. Councillor Kumar has got a question.
Yeah, hi. I think part of my question was the one that Councillor Granza asked, but you also say that you do not do enough to make, you know, that work, the workforce look like and represent the makeup of the community it polices, and which obviously undermines both trust, confidence, and effectiveness, in your own words. So I think that has been raised time and time again. And then you obviously read what and you hear what is being said. I mean, all the discrimination and all the allegations that come out, and that doesn't actually build confidence within those communities. So you've given a part answer, but I think it's really, really important, because we can't keep on raising it and other people raising it, because it's always one of the three top things that people mention, and they don't feel confident enough to come forward. And there are people who actually then suffer the consequences, and they don't even come out and say that. They may necessarily, they would talk to us, but I think it really, really needs a lot more work doing into it. And if, you know, because as Councillor Anand said, we are, you know, we work with our communities. That's where we get quite a bit of our information. So if there is any way that we can actually, but we do raise it. So I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but and you know, you've got aspirations to do a lot more, but then again, you in another report, you say that the resources, you know, the Met resources there's a reduction. Okay, so I mean, I don't see how, you know, I'd like you to explain that a little bit more, because the gross spend, the actual spend is, you know, in the past, what, 10, 12 years has been higher than in nearly everything than the actual. So Where is the challenge there? A little bit, you know, I did read, but I couldn't quite grasp it. And I think lastly, the other very important thing that keeps coming up is the 999 calls or the 101. I mean, there's deep frustration, and I think we must have mentioned it dozens of times over this period. But the new service that you've implemented, the 101 and 999, that's redirection, I'd like to know a little bit more about it. I know that call responses have improved since March, is it? Or since January. You started this in January, I believe, and then in March, so it's gone up, what, you know, just over 70%. But I think, you know, you are looking at expanding your command and control department and everything, but I think what is really, really going to happen is what I'd like to know. Please, thanks.
Let me try to capture all of those questions. And if I don't answer them, please remind me or prompt me to ones that I haven't. Okay. So obviously this is the commitment from the current commissioner around representation. When we get to the next stage of scrutiny, and again, we can capture it, I can make sure that we emphasize and demonstrate to you all the work that we're doing within our outreach teams to make sure that the organisation is as representative as it can be in terms of recruitment going forward. You know, you quite rightly challenge and call that out as a significant issue that hasn't been solved over a number of years. There are ancillary elements of which we all know make it very difficult for people to make that leap of faith to join the Met Police on the basis of what they see reported, which is why obviously the cultural element is vitally important and is called out by the Commissioner and by all of the officers. It's incumbent upon us to make sure that we tackle and challenge it. And no doubt that will continue to get lots of emphasis around our standards and our behaviours. It's not something that I'm going to be able to solve myself. You know, we are all responsible for recruitment, outreach, trying to reach hard to reach communities. You know, I could recount a number of elements of personal experience where I've tried to do that and where I expect my officers to advocate for the organisation of which they serve. There are opportunities, most definitely, to reach out more to hard to reach communities. And when you do come in to see the work that we're doing, you will see the work that we are doing in those hard to reach communities and those faith settings. But ultimately, there are also some disablers to the way that we recruit, which are definitely causing the Commissioner problems and inhibitors like cost of living crisis, starting salary, other elements of which, you know, wanting to live in London without London waiting, etc., and other things which the Commissioner I know calls out, which are part of it, albeit might not be the actual crucial issues to why people don't want to make that leap of faith and join the organisation. Other elements of your questions, would you mind just prompting me to the next bit and I'll try to cover it for you?
It was the new on the call.
So you talked about trust and confidence, I think. So the 4 enablers in my mind around trust and confidence. Effectively dealing with crime is one. So when you do call us, you expect us to deal and investigate that, not I suppose triage the incident and actually give you a response. So there's that element, which I know is a key focus of the organisation going forward. There's lots of reviews at the minute about how we investigate from start to finish our offences that are reported and alleged. The first point of contact, obviously, is our call handling centre. You know, I've talked about the increased demand that we've had. Yes, there are plans in place to tackle with that extra demand, some of which has been generated by phone providers and changes that have taken place in technology-based, which we are dealing with the phone providers directly. The other element is linked to societal changes. We're seeing an exponential increase in the number of theft offences. We're seeing a lot more local neighbourhood crime that's happening, and also antisocial behaviour as well. So all of those things are happening at once with the resources that we've got, which is why the Commissioner talks about the restructure element and making sure that we've got the right resources on frontline policing. Because we are stretched, undoubtedly, and you know, and that's clear, and you've seen that over the number of years. The Commissioner talks about austerity. You've seen what that structurally looks like for the Met Police, and it leads into other elements, plan around effectively fixing the foundations around where are our officers based, what police stations have they got, what equipment have they got, how many cars have we got, where are they? So all of the practical elements we kind of, on the flow diagram, we start to go back to. So I'm under no illusion that this 80-page document and the next 2 years are not going to be a very difficult and challenging place for the Met, with lots of things happening all at once, with lots of change all happening concurrently. But we are up for the challenge. We genuinely are. And trust me when I say that. And I know that my workforce is as well. And every single day they come in, they absolutely try and equivalently to do their best. But they need some of these foundations to change for them to be able to deliver and do some of those things and be more responsive, which is effectively what you're saying. Technology's got to change as well, definitely, you know, and it wasn't that long ago. I remember us going to the 3 control centres in London because we couldn't deal with demand in our dispatch rooms on each borough. So we've already outgrown what we've planned in terms of future-proofing the organisation with our current model, but we do have other major infrastructure changes happening in terms of our command and control and our call centres that are in the pipeline as part of major change. So it's not something that I can deliver here and now. It's certainly not something the Commissioner can deliver, but it is happening. And we as an organisation have demand that far exceeds any other international police service. And the Commissioner calls that out in terms of what that looks like. And also the amount per person that we spend on policing as well in the UK compared to America. I know it gets called out in the report as well. So we will be stretched around our budgets. And so as a result, we will be using more money because we've got less officers moving around and asking them to do a lot more. And that's definitely happening locally. Our budgets are stretched because we need to get that extra coverage. And if we haven't got the officers on the front line, then we have to spend some money to make sure we've got that coverage. So a bit of a convoluted answer, but perhaps when you come and see the next elements of scrutiny, we can focus on command and control, because I'd love to take you to some of our control centres and see what that response looks like when calls come through.
Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies. I'm going to need to do apologies, first of all, for interrupting Mr. Murray in the beginning of the meeting with the rather dramatic entrance and also my lateness. I need to do a declaration of interest. I need to refer to my register of interest, that I'm a member of the Cooperative Party, and then I need to give the following information. I was a member of Ealing's Youth Justice Forum from the Twyford Church of England High School nominee, indeed, from 1999 to 2003. I was part of the Devon and Cornwall Youth Policing Panel from 2005 to 2007. I was the chair of Safer Exeter, Safer Students, Safer City from 2005 to 2007. I was a member of the Hampstead and Fulham Safety Advisory Group from 2011 to 2014. I was an advisor to London 2012, the Olympics and Paralympics, on safety, policing and access. I remain a consultant to the Football Association, English Football League, the Premier League, UEFA, FIFA and England and Wales Cricket Board on safety and policing within major sporting events. I don't believe any of those are pecuniary interests, but if anyone believes I should recuse myself from the meeting, I'll do it now. Thank you. Apologies. Thank you for your candour, Superintendent. Just drawing on the contributions from colleagues so far, from Councillor Anand, from Councillor Kwanzaa and from Councillor Kumar, as someone who has lived this experience and is as white as you are, I completely endorse their comments regarding diversity. And I wish to illustrate this with an example, if I may. On Friday, Mr. Murphy sent out the Section 35 dispersal notice to local councillors that was put in place by Lee Ballard because of the fact that we'd had a lot of antisocial behaviour across South Acton mainly, but it now stretches into North Acton, and it is my old that's my old school. I haven't yet been able to respond to Mr. Murphy because on Friday I had, let's have a look here, 171 phone calls, emails and correspondence from parents, from residents of just within North Acton about the imposition of this measure I quote tweeted the tweet from the Metropolitan Police Service Twitter account of Southampton. There is an issue here, I think, in terms of, I understand the reasons. Sorry, thank you. I understand the reasons for why it was necessary, but going back to the points that have been made by colleagues, it is an issue of communication, and historically, young people of colour are more likely to be stopped, searched, or investigated as a result of these dispersal orders, Section 35, Section 60, whatever it is. And I've spoken, previously in these forums about how proud I am of how proud I am of the neighbourhood policing model, how proud I am of the work of Mr. Murphy, Mr. Murray, his colleagues, and what was the Acton Central Board and is sadly no longer. And I'm going to my ward panel tomorrow night, and Sergeant Buckland is superb, but we've also had a problem with boundary changes. It's very difficult. I don't expect you to give a full accounting of this one. I would just say the best way forward is that we absolutely take up and make as a recommendation, Chair, the suggestion that there is some more induction or introduction to your neighbourhood policing teams under these new models, because I know that we had to wait for, I think, the Commissioner to approve the switch from the old ward boundaries that the local authority had to make to, the Metropolitan Police being reorganised on the ward boundaries that we now have. And all of that is confusing, but I'll finish, and it's the most long-winded question even I have ever asked here in this forum, with the fact that the problem is the people who need to know why that measure was in place don't know. I didn't know. I'm a local councillor. I didn't know. I haven't spoken to either of my senior officers here about the reasons why. How did I get the intelligence? The kids told me, right? They're not kids, right? They've got a great schools officer. You've got a good team in there in the school in Twyford, but people don't know. And if we can't police with consent of young people, we might as well just stop completely. So thank you, Chair, and I don't expect you to give a...
Let me try. Okay, so this Thursday I have got a meeting actually with a significant number of school heads to talk about local policing in Ealing and policing response to various incidents that have taken place over the last number of months. So I wouldn't be surprised if this matter came up. So I look forward to having that conversation and dialogue. Equally, I look forward to receiving you when we go into the next phase of the scrutiny work, where we can talk through application and use of powers, and also how we communicate that. And the power that you quite rightly called out that Lee Ballard's invoked, using Section 35 dispersal notice kind of powers locally in a confined area linked to the end of schools, which regularly is a power that gets used across London at this time of the year on that very basis. What's good, I think, is to have that conversation offline, just to talk about the use of that power and application and some of the elements that you've called out there, as we've talked about there, in terms of what that is in terms of impacts to various local communities and disproportionate impact. Now, I don't know the makeup of that particular school and the dynamic in terms of what representation looks like personally, because I've not been here that long, but I really do take on board your point there in terms of how that and naturally can be not just perceived, but seen by the local community, the parents of the children that go to those various schools, and also maybe the estates where those young people live. So 100%, I take your points on board. Thank you. I look forward to discussing them with you at length when we see you in the next phase.
Yeah, I've got about 10 questions, but it may be that you want to finish your presentation first and I'll come back to them.
Absolutely mindful that we're at 8:15, so I'll just go back a bit if I can. So I just wanted to stress on the values element there. That's also within, because this slide is an important slide for me. So the Commissioner and Management Board, with consultation, and with considerable thought has decided to change the values. And our values within the Met Police are not the same values that are adhered to by officers across other forces in the UK under the College of Policing. And that's not unusual. The Met's always been an outlier when it comes to performance frameworks, promotion frameworks, which we know get called out in the report, and also our values. So all I will say there is that there is a change to the values, albeit the common theme around respect, integrity, and courage continue, but there are two additional elements of empathy and accountability, of which, again, I'm pleased to see, but likewise, this is separate to what the College of Policing looks like in terms of core framework around values. So if you do see other elements or other documents that are circulating, these are the values that every officer and every member of staff is expected to adopt and continue to deliver. And I really welcome the accountability bit, as I've stressed already, which is why I'm here. And I don't know of many of the other officers that have already stepped into the space of scrutiny, but I think it's a really important place to be, because there's nothing to hide, and I want to explain why we do what we do, the constraints that we have, and also what we're trying to achieve with our partners and stakeholders. So thank you, cheers. And then we've talked upon some of the elements here, and I think this comes out in a lot of the questions already tonight, just in terms of what the Commissioner is also trying to achieve. And these are the enablers for me as a superintendent and frontline to be able to see, and actually for you to be able to see as well, just in terms of what that looks like. So a rebalance of where our people are to more frontline based focus. So more officers in uniform, more officers working in frontline, less specialist departments. And of course, you know, it's well documented already in the Casey review around some of the cultures and behaviours of some of the other specialist departments, which again gets called out within the new Met for London, which I know is a big focus of the Commissioner. The equipment piece is an interesting one, but I think maybe that's around operationalising the officers to make sure that they've got the right equipment and the skills that go with it to be able to give a service to the public. And there are elements of equipment that are called out within the new Met for London report. The training bit, which is really important to me, and I've touched upon it already, we are a young workforce. And on frontline policing in particular, many of the officers that work locally have got less than 5 years service, which does have an impact, most definitely. And that's intertwined with the supervision ratios and what that looks like in terms of crime investigation, initial response to incidents, the guidance and the tutorship the officers have, which I had when I had my journey into the organisation, is entirely different now, especially with our pathways, which again, I might be able to explain when you come out and do some of the site surveys with us. Storage is particular focus around some of the well-documented cases around some of the equipment that we have, and poor storage of equipment and exhibits, which have clearly hampered significantly criminal justice outcomes. And then the support element, I suppose, is where the Commissioner calls out in the annex to say that actually we can't do this alone. We need to do this with other stakeholders. Otherwise, we won't be able to achieve the benefits that he wants to in the next 2 years. So, which for me is linked to that collaboration piece going forward as well, of course, naturally, and what we should be doing anyway. So thanks, Paul. And then the Commissioner calls out within the document various performance elements of which he wants us, expects us to continue to be, and to be a focus of attention. So I'll probably spend the next 10 minutes, Chair, if that's okay, going through some of these, and then I can stop and pause, and then hopefully that gives enough time for questions, of which you've got multiple. So trust and confidence, we've talked about there. There's so many variables there. Effectively, effective engagement, response to policing, fair and responsive policing, and antisocial behaviour, for me, are some of the big 4 drivers about how we deliver our services locally. So some of this element here is what we already are measured against in terms of the public attitude survey. So proportion of Londoners think we're doing a good job, proportion of Londoners who trust the Met, are victim satisfied, so we're starting to go into the user satisfaction survey, and other elements of which the Commissioner obviously wants to see an upward trajectory. Now, we can only do that by giving a really good response and by fixing the foundations and making sure we've got the right officers with the right training, the right equipment, that are giving a really good response to victims and also to communities. So naturally, more trust less crime, high standards. It says it already. It's a big mantra of the Commissioner, is where he wants to emphasise that focus. So all of those variables need to go up 100%. You know, it is a challenge as to how we shift them all, of course, but we do know what the key enablers are and the drivers are. So the Commissioner calls out neighbourhood crime in particular, with a real focus on personal robbery, theft from person, residential burglary and vehicle crime. I think for most officers, that is what I would expect to see as well going forward, and all of which are evasive, challenging, difficult crimes. And of course, locally in Ealing, we are seeing an increase in inquisitive crime, theft. Burglary is obviously a challenge, as is motor vehicle crime. So in our hotspot location, so very relevant. So obviously wants to see a significant reduction in that, with no doubt focus on offender, location, and a longer term look as well, of course, with the various plans that I have with my counterparts, as I've already discussed. The Commission doesn't want us to lose sight and focus around serious violence. Of course, some of which of those crimes are already called out are intertwined, whether it be enabled with a knife or some kind of use of force. Of course, we can work with our partners around some of the other elements and variables, licensable activity, events, any other drivers, gangs, and other work that we already have locally happening to try to reduce and mitigate the risk around violence, serious violence, and of course violence against women and girls, which is a continued priority of the Commissioner going forward and locally for me, and homicide as well. Naturally, of course, to make sure that we do our absolute utmost. We are not one of the pilot sites for the offensive weapon homicide review work that's happening with MOPAC in London. That is not a million miles away across the border, but nonetheless, you know, reducing serious incidents of violence, maintaining that equilibrium across the command is really important. And Ealing, along with the other boroughs, obviously has a large number of domestic abuse incidents, of which we know violence, escalation, threat to vulnerable females, not just vulnerable females, but other communities as well, plays out as well. And there are other policy changes as well we've made locally around increasing the number of officers that we've got looking at hate crime and LGBT crime, which I can talk about when you come out and do some of your site surveys with us. Naturally, the Commissioner's also set the wanting to reduce the number of incidents of gun crime and lethal barrel discharges, which is the phrase that we use and is recorded, working with Trident. And then, of course, linked to the uplift, what we're going to see in public protection across London with the 565 officers, greater outcomes for victims, greater confidence, you know, greater sanctions detection rapes for rape and more serious sexual offences, and of course, greater use of our powers like stalking prevention orders and other elements of work which we already use locally, but just making sure there's less victims. So a real focus on neighbourhood crime. Within that as well, obviously the Commissioner calls out other key indicators of which we will be held to account for in many forums around increasing our proportions of positive outcomes for hate crime and reducing hate crime, and our response to that, obviously well-documented cases, of course, naturally, and that is driving policy change within the organisation. Linked to Operation Lilford and the inquiry, obviously, into Stephen Port, etc., as an example. And then something which is an extra responsibility for me as a result of being at Ealing. I'm also the lead responsible officer, as I've just mentioned to my colleagues, around antisocial behaviour for London. So not just for Ealing. So making sure we're reducing the number of incidents, we're using our powers with our partners, effectively using our legislation, like I witnessed on Friday in Hanwell, using community protection notices and community protection warnings, and also in the afternoon, utilising our powers around warrants to impact upon local drug problems. So yeah, okay. And then standards piece, which gets called out. Obviously, this is more internal, but equally it's linked to our behaviours and how we conduct ourselves with victims of crime and also in the community. It's well played out there in terms of the elements that the Commissioner wants to see an improvement in terms of disproportionality in our misconduct matters, which is something which I can certainly share with you when you come to see me, and other elements of work around public complaints and how we basically speed our processes up locally, which again is why I expect to see policy change with the Home Secretary around police misconduct and regulations, which are very difficult and challenging. And some of the processes are called out. Instead of having 6 processes to dismiss an officer, the Commissioner would like to have 3, for example, to expedite that process. And it's well documented about other elements around vetting, criminality, expediting fast track cases, greater use of suspension for officers to maintain trust and confidence. So lots of elements of work that gets a lot of focus already there, which I'm pleased to see. And then there's some internal measures there in terms of, well, obviously, you know, aimed at me and other senior leaders, is just in terms of the Met Officers staff who are confident in their leaders at all levels, not just Inspector, Chief Inspector and Superintendent, but other levels as well, first line managers in particular. And again, an internal measure around officers that feel content and happy to report and whistleblow on their fellow colleagues where they see inappropriate misconduct or absolute outrageous criminality. So yeah, all around the standards piece. Thanks, Will. And 5 minutes early there, but yeah, just a little whistle stop tour. If I'm honest, there is another 2 slides. This is it's the summary document basically, which talks about some of the other elements. I do think is good for me to stress those 2 pages, and that's it. And then I can open up for questions, hopefully for half an hour, Chair, if that's okay. So could we go to the 2-page summary, which comes with the full report, which has already been circulated at the point of launch. Yeah, well, this is going to test my eyesight again, Paul. Thanks. So,
wait for me to share it. In 2 seconds.
or I can pull it up on my screen. Don't worry.
Yeah, sure.
Should I do it on mine? I'll do it on mine.
I'll get it up on the
Okay.
big screen here then.
That's fine. I've got it. Okay, so Paul's going to pull it up on the screen, but this is the 2-page summary of the new Met for London, where the Commissioner calls out, alongside Management Board, elements of progress to date. And the renewed focus, again highlighting, as I did at the beginning of the scrutiny panel, the fact that we've had 10,000 interactions. We're building upon the turnaround consultation, and this is the plan that the Commissioner is setting into stone now, ready to go for the next 2 years and beyond. So there are some successes that are called out by the Commissioner in terms of progress, in terms of reduction in burglary across London. We are answering more calls, as you quite rightly called out and played back to me already today. And of course, you've already seen the emphasis with Operation Satira and others, which we're doing in terms of getting to more positive outcomes around serious sexual assault and rape cases. And then, of course, you know, a lot of emphasis tonight has been around the doubling down on standards and professionalism, which I'm seeing with the increase in officers in our professional standards departments, essentially. Some of the bits that I've talked about already around community crime fighting are here on the slide deck, just in terms of the additional numbers that we're going to see coming through the door, which I'm pleased to see. So an extra uplift in police community support officers on the horizon, with 500 initially in motion at the moment, coming out towards. Obviously, the commitment from the Commissioner around local priorities being set within our wards. A lot more responsive to the needs of the communities. The DWO commitment and the retention piece, trying to make sure that those officers are protected so they're always on their ward, bar a few exemptions around New Year's Eve and Notting Hill Carnival, which have been long-standing. And then, of course, the strengthening commitment the Commissioner is putting into train as well around public protection with the 565 officers. We've got the continued commitment around the 24/7 police station. And then, of course, lots of plans around trying to make sure that we answer those phone calls, which you could say is representative of people having more confidence in wanting to report incidents to police. But I'm happy to have that conversation. And then again, already we've seen some changes before this plan was launched around working with the Victims Commissioner, Claire Waxman, and others around our victim focus desks and some pilot sites that have started to happen as well. So all of that. We've dwelt a lot on the culture change, which is, you know, absolutely pivotal to everything that the officers and staff do in the organisation. And again, I'm sure that will become a big feature of some of the work that I'm really happy to open our doors to, so you can see what work we're doing locally and also in some of our more central departments. And then the fixing the foundations piece, which again is a little bit more practical. It's linked to some of the budget considerations the Commissioners outlined in the annex at the end of the report. And of course is a challenge, and the Commissioner regularly goes on record comparing the Met with New York per capita spend and what that looks like. going forward, to make sure that we're professionally, operationally ready to respond to the changing crime types. And of course, all the elements of work and stuff that we see that which we aren't talking about here tonight around cybercrime and other elements of vulnerability, which I regularly see coming across my desk locally when I'm on call. So I'll pause and stop. I've done an awful lot of talking, Chair. Thank you. And I know there's lots of questions, so I'm going to have to stop. Thank you.
Councillor Summers, got a question?
Well, thanks. I'm going to try to do 4, if I may, and then maybe if I get a chance, come back. Firstly, recruitment. I know that a few years ago, the decision was made to make all new recruits have to have degrees. Surely that is hampering your chances of recruiting, or filling your recruitment numbers. Personally, I think that was a really bad decision. You're reducing the amount of people. Just because somebody hasn't got a degree doesn't mean that they cannot do the job. Just an observation as much as a question. Secondly, on that last slide, it mentions the victim focus desk. I don't know if you could explain a bit more what that is. I mean, surely all officers should be sort of victim focused, but I don't know if you could explain a bit more about what it is. Thirdly, police stations on page 22, it talks about Londoners will be easier to contact people. Each borough will have at least one 24/7 front counter. In this borough, is it not Acton, which is an awful long way from my ward in Northolt, and Southall police station would probably be easier for people to get to. But I just wondered, it also talks about possibly co-locating with local partners. So the idea, possibly, I know Ealing police station's got a big question mark over it. I just wondered whether you are considering co-locating in Percival House, or whether that would be an option. And lastly, on this point, cost. On page 79, the annex, it talks about the cost of this new Met for London being a total of 366 million. Is that extra money on top of the current Met budget? And if so, where's this money coming from?
Thanks. Okay, so the pathways to join the Met there are many. So the traditional pathway, which we used to call an acronym called IPPLDIP, which don't ask me what that means now, because I can't remember, is the route and pathway that many officers, obviously over the last number of years, have joined, which is the traditional pathway, of course, which was 18 weeks at Hendon, in particular in London, which was the pathway that I went through, with then 10-week street duties and then 2-year probation. So all of that's changed, of course, as you quite rightly call out. It's not necessarily the case that you have to have a degree to join. There are other pathways. So we have a degree apprenticeship scheme as well. So rather than join with a degree where you do a 2-year probation, you can join without a degree, but part of the condition elements of joining is that you have a 3-year probationary period. You are given study time, and whilst you're in the organisation, you will learn elements of the course which will give you effectively a degree qualification at the end of your 3 years. So that is the apprenticeship entry process scheme. We also have other pathway entries as well, many of which are governed by the College of Policing, and sometimes the Met signs up or doesn't. You can have, for example, in recent years, we've had a direct entry schemes for superintendents, we've had a direct entry scheme for inspectors, and different pathways. Not all of those exist at the moment, although I'm sure that all of those elements will change going forward. And there are internal schemes around development, culture, fast tracking, and as we've called out there, obviously, to try to support and nurture and develop talent around diversity as well. So it's quite a complicated space, but again, something that we could certainly focus on next time going forward with the next elements of scrutiny around HR and what our recruitment pathways look like. But yeah, point well made in terms of traditional pathways and how that can actually prevent us from recruiting. The victim focus element is there are new pilots that are happening across London around victim focused desks as opposed to officers being victim focused. as you quite rightly call out, all officers should be victim focused in their approach, you know, and be professional, have the confidence, have the authority to be able to give informed information to victims of crime, and also have the skills, the subtle skills, the softer skills, as I've called out, which sometimes some of the younger officers might be more challenged by when they are speaking to vulnerable victims of crime who may be, let's say, 20 years older than them. And as a traditional pathway officer, very difficult to be put into a setting as a 21-year-old when you go into a domestic setting, when you're dealing with a domestic incident, when you've got two parties who are in their, say, 30s or 40s, and vulnerable children when you might not be a parent of your own. So we put our officers in a really difficult space. I've gone through that journey, so I can relate to it. But really understanding how we can be more victim focused, supporting victims in terms of trauma, what that looks like, other agencies, what other processes are out there that way can help people. Also, that will go through to the criminal justice system as well, about what that journey looks like to support victims through there. So it is a big piece of work. Whilst we are on a pilot site at the moment, it is something that structurally will change as part of the work that's happening in the Met. The front counter question is a really valid question. Absolutely, you know, I've been here 2 months, but yet the front counter we have here is in Acton, which is where one of our custody suites is, you know, and it's a long way away. I totally understand and accept that in terms of wanting to see representation visibly, see an officer, get some advice, speak to someone at the front counter and have that presence. You know, we can certainly explore that conversation about what that looks like locally. The commitment is one police station, isn't it, within the new Met for London, which is probably for most is the commitment that most of us already have across 24/7 coverage for a police station. But there are other avenues, I think, that need to be explored locally around what contact looks like. And historically, we've had elements like contact points, different other elements in shopping centres and other bits as well, just to make sure that there's more visibility from the officers and more engagement, more importantly. The co-location piece, big advocate for that, absolutely. In most partnership settings that I've worked in, we've prospered from co-location, and without putting the two people on the spot next to me, it was one of the first things I think I talked about. And to be fair, they're really receptive to it and want that collaboration happening with various antisocial behaviour licensing, multi-agency safeguarding hub officers, etc. So I'm going to pause because I think Jess wants to come in on that.
I was only going to add to say that we have co-location in that respect. So the ASB team and licensing service sit with Paul's community safety team, which also sits next to my licensing service and things like that. So that's the geographical cluster-based model. So effectively, those teams kind of sit in the 4 clusters. So you get police officers, both from an ASB and licensing perspective, and community safety officers and environmental health officers, noise, for example, things like that, or looking at a problem collectively based on the locality as opposed to their individual silos. But I think it's something that a conversation is carrying on around co-location, because obviously we've had changes coming up with Percival House. We're also opening a separate kind of out of hours CCTV operational base, which gives us another location to engage with police and work flexibly with them in a co-located space as well. But absolute principle for us in terms of working in partnership, sharing our powers, sharing our intelligence, sharing our knowledge.
And the question around costs, I'm probably not best placed to give you the answer because I don't really know. Albeit, of course, these are indicative costs. I mean, it's very light touch, isn't it? Obviously, there's not much detail there in terms of what that looks like for the forward plan. And I'd have to defer and come back to you a lot more about that in more detail about what that looks like going forward. But obviously, there's some eye-watering numbers there, which the Commissioner and Management Board, alongside various teams within London, have projected as to what this will look like going forward. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Crawford.
I don't want to be flippant about this at all, especially as Councillor Summers has asked 3 of the questions I was going to ask. Although I totally disagree with Councillor Summers if he's suggesting moving the established police station at Acton and placing it somewhere else in the borough. Knowing Councillor Summers as I do, I know that's not what he's suggesting. And this is, I know we're going over ground that Mr. Murray, Mr. Murphy have heard many, many times. Indeed, you, Chair, will know we've had a long discussion in this panel and on this council about police numbers, police stations, police counters. The truth of the matter is, before we had the austerity programme referenced in the case review and implemented by the other political parties who were in power in Westminster at the time, we had 3 fully operational police stations within the London Borough of Ealing. You could go to Southall, and my Southall colleagues will be able to reference that. And we do need a police presence within Southall. We need a police presence in all of the 7 towns. And I think that's what Councillor Summers is referencing. And I do think there really is an opportunity. I'm not privy to what comes next in Percival House, but having been on the licensing committee for, what was it, 7 years, you know, there is no better example, I think, in London, and maybe further than the what you've referenced, Superintendent, which is the collaborative work between the police and the council. And given that finances are tight, I mean, we might as well, I wonder, we should make recommendations eventually as a panel on this. Finances are tight, resources are tight, the Metropolitan Police is stretched. That is not new money, by the way. I'll say it so that you don't have to come. That is potentially coming out of it will come out of the GLA precept. I can say it. It's extra money, but it'll be solved through negotiation between the Commissioner and the Mayor and various things. But I can say that as a political, as a councillor, the Superintendent can't say that. I think we can, and we can probably recommend as a scrutiny panel that we should try and pursue closer collaboration and co-location of buildings and facilities. We've got loads of facilities, loads of community centres, loads of vacant places, loads of, you know, let's make sure that we've got what we call community policing, frontline policing, what we always used to know back in the day. You knew who your neighbourhood cop was, right? And the only reason they can't do it is because you don't have places to put them, right? And we've got an ability through the towns, through the 7 towns model to really look at that. And I think that's the most instructive recommendation that we could make as a scrutiny panel, is that we say tonight or through this scrutiny process that we will, you know, urge the council to investigate this further. And then, you know, we'll see what we can come up with. Well, you know, we're not going to get 3 24/7 front counters back, I don't think. But I think we can get more of a police presence across the 7 towns within the borough, and I think across the BCU wider, you know, because that's so important. Fear of crime is the number, Councillor Kumar referenced the 3 top things people talked about. Crime, fear of crime is not always number 1 with my residents, always number 1 in the residents survey. And it's often just a fear of crime, perception of crime, not the actual, not to diminish the crimes that may occur. But we can tackle that as collective. And as I say, totally endorse what Mr. Murray has said in respect of how well we work together, because I know how hard everybody works. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, we're not making a recommendation on this meeting. It's for next meeting we'll be making.
Could I just say that a really helpful suggestion, especially around the town centre, you know, the 7 town centre approach. And obviously I've already been having some of those conversations around what that policing presence looks like across all the 7, where our officers are already located. And also working with Jess and Paul and other partners, Nikki Online and others going forward, just what our approach around estate-based policing looks like as well. So, but yeah, really helpful suggestions. Thank you.
Councillor Thai and then Councillor Kumar, that'd be our last question.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. Thanks for all the answers so far. And I just wanted to ask a question about the ward panels, and I think they're really high potential. You know, I think they're really very good. And recently in North Hanwell, we invited one of the a representative from one of the local schools, a parent joined, and also someone from the local businesses. Because one thing that we've really picked up is like the businesses see everything day to day as well, and it's been really helpful to sort of join the dots, and it's really enhanced the ward panels we have. So I just wanted and to get a picture of if you kind of had a chance to meet with the various ward panels yet, or the chairs of them, because I just think they're a really good resource. And certainly if there's any ideas on how we can work together to promote them, that would be great. And then the other thing was just on the matter of resources. And I should just say as well, it really is wonderful that Ealing now does have a superintendent. I think that's something really worth underlining and welcoming. I suppose you spoke about the commitment as well, you know, that there are commitments to more resource, and was just sort of understanding the timelines. And I know it can be hard to be super clear on those, but it would be really helpful. I suppose one of the feedback points people have said is, and I know it's cropped up here this evening, but people feel really encouraged when they see police out on the street, and that visibility point is really important. And I understand in North Hanwell, I think our PC has been moved, he's been redeployed somewhere. And people are just, I know the resources are so stretched, but it's just if we could get a sense on the timelines, I think that would be really good. And I think there's evidence of the commitment already with the new superintendent in place, with yourself in place, but it's just to kind of find out what the timeline might be for more resource in terms of local police officers.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for that comment. That's really nice to hear. Thank you. So ward panels, yeah, absolutely. Historically, in other roles I've performed in different commands, regularly met with ward panel chairs, invaluable resource, as you quite rightly said, in the partnership collectively. To give me a real litmus paper test, I suppose, what really truly is happening out there. Also, what policing response looks like to incidents. I haven't yet had that opportunity to meet with all the ward panel chairs. I look forward to it. I don't think that I will probably see ward panels functioning to the level that I expect. I know that it's already been a subject of conversation, but previously where I've worked, we've had really strong functioning ward panels, and it's been a big precursor for good, effective, strong engagement. We've talked about it already, people volunteering, people wanting to get involved in events, activities, and also supporting the local policing team. So an area of focus that I've already started to have conversations with Lee Ballard and Dinkesh Patel with, alongside what I also haven't mentioned, which we should stress as well here, is that under the new model, we've gone to a designated chief inspector for each borough as well. So Chief Inspector James Herring's not here tonight. He's at the actual Hillingdon New Met for London launch event this evening, just to oversee and see how that runs with some of my other counterparts. But we've actually invested more in the leadership team because Lee and Dinkesh locally are doing, for me, a great job, but they need some extra capacity and capability, and they need some extra top cover of people to be able to basically maximize and optimize the partnership, what we can do and what our influence looks like. So there's lots of work happening in that space, I suppose, but ward panels definitely a key feature for Lee, Dinkesh, and for James, definitely. I look forward to meeting them all. The commitment and timelines, obviously, notwithstanding the fact, you know, the scale, complexity, and the pace the Commissioner references in the document, doesn't stop us, me, locally, from trying to influence, make changes where I can, and influence my peers within the structure we have locally. So whilst this plan is over 2 years, and of course, centrally, we'll start to see decision-making that has a positive impact upon Ealing, like the proactive review and releasing officers from pressure posts to come back to front line. We will start to see those officers coming through, you know, in those timelines. But there are some local tactical decisions of which already I've started to, if I'm honest, wade into, and I share regularly with Paul, Jess, and others, and in other forums as well, about what I'm trying to do to increase visibility in some of our hotspot locations in Ealing. And that isn't me being competitive, that's me engaging with my partners, colleagues in the police, to understand why we've made tactical decisions about deployment of certain officers, whether they be at Southall, whether they be elsewhere, or So there are those decisions that are happening, and so we've already talked about some of our younger officers which need that nurturing development support. And I'm glad to say that some of our street duties courses and our new officers that are coming through will soon be positioned from Ealing Police Station, so I can have more of a visible footprint for officers on foot patrol in Ealing Broadway, other wards, Walpole, and also heading towards Hanwell as well, just from that particular angle, which will be a great benefit to my local teams who can interact and support them. It also capacity build the local officers. It'll give the street duties officer something a bit different as well in terms of their outlook, rather than going through their existing 10-week programme. They'll be engaging with neighbourhood officers locally. So that's one element. And then there's other pieces of work around resources that are at my disposal to flex. For example, the neighbourhood tasking team, which currently is based in Southall, who I regularly expect Laura Molyneux, who's the inspector, to engage with Lee Ballard to make sure that if we have got challenges on particular wards, or we've got issues which necessitate officers not being fully functioning or operational for various reasons, that we mitigate those challenges by having coverage from the neighbourhood tasking team, focusing on those hotspots. So that already happens. And then there's the opportunity for me to link in with other colleagues in other departments to get other resource, whether it be plainclothes or other elements of focus around predatory offending in certain areas as well, which is the space I expect James to operate with Lee and Dinkesh. So kind of happening already. So you will see quick wins, but you'll see stuff longer term in terms of the structural bit happening over a longer period. And Ealing Police Station, what a great place to have a police station. Goodness, I've only been here a few weeks, but what a great location, and I know that there's a real drive from the Borough Commander that as part of the estate strategy review, which everything is up for grabs, and the Commission's commitment about 20 minutes being away from your local ward, I'm really hopeful around that aspect. But the co-location piece, again, as other points that have been raised, I think really will help with that visibility too. We've got 6 locations where neighbourhood officers are based in Ealing, and I'm really open and happy to have a conversation about should they be somewhere else already. But thank you for your reflection as well.
Councillor Connor.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your patience. I mean, I know, but there are lots and lots of questions that people still want to ask. But the key commitment that we as members would want to know is actually the aim that you want to deliver to dedicated ward officers and a PCSO in every ward. So I mean, this has been previously committed, but obviously not delivered. So what reassurances are you able to offer that all 24 wards in our borough will have the 2 DWOs and PCSOs by October as per your, and if they are, and what will you do to protect these teams from abstractions to other duties? As you mentioned earlier, they may be called into London, or it might be response cover, something like that. I think I better get this one is, and what recourse will communities have to challenge police if they feel that this commitment has not been met? So I think that is a question that needs to be asked. So can you commit to us when we will see at least 2 dedicated ward officers and 1 PCSO in every ward, and more in higher sort of crime areas as well? That was another thing that had been said. And if you could tell us tell us about Ealing's priority wards. What are they, and what additional resourcing will they be getting, and when? Thank you.
Sorry, let me try and cover those questions. Thank you. So let me be clear in terms of my approach from day one and my expectation. And this does bring me into conflict locally around areas of responsibility. And it's incumbent upon me to negotiate, as I've already said with my colleagues, about the number of officers that we have within the neighbourhood setting. So already I can tell you now, we regularly go into meetings where we talk about resources and allocation of officers. And I am, as a bare minimum, advocating what is already set here in the new Met for London around making sure that I have 2 officers on every single ward and a PCSO as a start point. So that's happened really from the day one I've got here. And I will continue to bang the drum every single month on behalf of Ealing residents and my strand. My other neighbourhood counterparts will be doing exactly the same, if not already. I'm probably a bit more vocal than they are about my expectation about what that looks like. So that's for me to have those conversations internally. So that's continuing to happen. As for the commitment, it's laid out. The commitment there from the Commissioner about and the timeline, you've quite rightly called it out and played it back to me. October 23, all wards will have 2 DWOs and 1 PCSO. That's the commitment. That's the commitment that you can all hold me to account to. Equally, already, in terms of holding me to account, there are obviously existing forums that do just that in terms of policing response, number of officers, etc. already. So Safer Neighbourhood Board principally being that, and Safer Ealing Partnership equally as well, arguably as well. So quite rightly so. So there are already structures that exist that hold me to account. But my commitment to you is the same as I always have in those statutory forums and groups, that is my #1 priority anyway, and it always has been since coming into post. The abstractions and the stabilisation piece is a challenge, especially across the Met and equally at West Area Command Unit when we are under strength. You know, we have to get to the response calls in the first instance. So naturally, there is an element, you've already played it back to me in terms of the phrase you used in terms of kind of backfilling or covering response. It's incumbent upon all of the senior leadership team and all the supervisors to make sure that we have all our officers fully fit. We try to enable them so they can come back to work, those that have got injuries, and any other challenges that they may have linked to mental health or personal health. So all of that happens already and will continue to be, if I'm honest, drilled into. Again, it regularly happens to make sure that we've got as many fit officers that we have. The central policies are changing in terms of abstraction levels locally. Now that work has started and continues to start around how we risk assess events that aren't necessarily happening in Ealing in terms of the number of officers that we require. There's been talked around that in terms of kind of the security element. Obviously, we have had significant abstraction in central London for various ceremonial events in the last 12 months or so for various reasons, as we all know. So that will continue, but there is definitely a commitment centrally to reduce the number of officers that are called to work in different boroughs, which is happening. So I will see a continual sort of progression around that. I regularly see our abstraction rates and ask to see those from my counterpart within our HQ strand, as I've kind of talked about earlier already today. The high harm, you called it, I think, so our focus wards, there is already a plan in terms of what that will look like going forward. And I sit on a number of work streams around the Strong Safer Neighbourhood programme. More will follow through chief executives and others around what that allocation and also decision making and the process looks like across London, alongside the Commissioner's commitment. The Commissioner obviously calls it out within the new Met for London. Some wards will see an increase in officers and PCSOs. Whilst I've seen some preliminary information around that, that's still evolving. So I'm not at liberty to share that at the moment, but it is still happening. And then notwithstanding that, of course, while you use the term Ealing priority wards, naturally, we already see and we already know the wards that have the highest proportion of crime, antisocial behaviour, and also, of course, overlaying that, we already know the mosaic data and what those communities look like already. So that's something that's already within our gift. And I don't need to wait to have additional uplift of officers. And it's within my gift to flex and move officers around already to make sure that I'm responding to the needs of the community, trends, whether they be short term and longer term. So, and I've made that very clear to Lee and to Dinkesh as well, that I'm empowering them to do just that. So, and if they can't, then they need to come to me to give them extra resource and support. So that's kind of still happening already going forward. hopefully that answers your question. But again, very happy to, when we go to the next stage of scrutiny, to talk about how we resource across London.
Yep, it's 9 o'clock. Briefly,
Yes, I promised I'll be very brief. I just wanted to touch on restorative justice and community paybacks. There's a long section in the case review about some of the need to do more of that. I know that this is a priority for the Met Police. We've done some restorative justice in Ealing. I just seek to highlight pioneers of the model further afield, including Sheffield City Council, Manchester City Council and South Somerset Council. Their community restorative justice boards are really good. On community payback, it relates to, I think, Councillor Ty speaking about North Hamwell, some of those problems, and you referenced it in your comments on Friday, from your visit on Friday. Community payback with specifically designed community panels, which is, I think, what you're alluding to when you were saying ward panels might not be at the level that some of them might not be at the level that. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the Met lead for restorative justice quite well, and yeah, really keen to see that play out locally in terms of what that looks like with the partners around the table. And historically, community payback is something I know that through policy and decision making, not necessarily the police has found some of our partners quite constrained about what they can do around community payback. But equally, I think it's really useful and invaluable. Certainly gives the sense of I suppose empowerment to local communities to realise that people are giving something back as a result of effective policing and work with probation and other providers to support that. So, but yeah, very much keen to explore that. I know that has been the subject of conversation in other forums that I've been in already since being at Ealing.
Literally just 2 seconds add on that. In terms of restorative justice, Ealing has done some limited restorative justice in the past. It doesn't make up a significant proportion of what we do, and a lot of it was trial and error, I think, with restorative justice in Ealing, although there's some really good outcomes. There is a conversation at the upcoming Safe Reading Partnership specifically around community payback, because there is an offer from central government around community payback. I'm not convinced at this point probation locally are able to deliver it to the standard that we would expect it to be delivered to. But we do have some new representation at senior level within probation, some really good indicators from what we're hearing from them about their willingness to engage with us and work with us around community payback and sort of local funding, local projects and supporting them meaningfully as well. So that is something that we're looking at the moment, and it is something that's been discussed strategically. Thanks.
Final question from Councillor Kumar.
Thank you. Sorry. No, my last bit on the questions I asked previously is the priority wards. What, where are they? What are they? And I'm not sure if our Safer Communities has got that information. If you do, then I'm not really sure about that. And, sort of what additional resourcing will they get and when? Because, October's not terribly far.
I think Sean mentioned that that's not been finalised yet, so that can't be advised.
Yeah, so I've seen some initial modelling, so I am privy to that information. I do know it's still subject to conversation within the Strategic Insight Unit, who's done all the design modelling around the focused wards in London, and it's still subject to conversations. And I've been in meetings in the last couple of weeks around that subject. But I know that there will be a conversation with chief execs about what that looks like for their respective councils, and also the science, if I'm honest, behind it. So I won't use the word data because we've heard that enough tonight.
Okay, thank you. And you, Chair, Superintendent mentioned the SNB. I don't know if I'm meant to declare that my daughter is the chairman of the SNB. So it's better to be safe than.
Thank you. Yeah. Just it's for Paul or Jess. Can you update us on the co-optees. I understand it's work in progress. Anything happening with that? And also, if possible, the timetable for.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. The co-optees are very much a work in progress at this point, and something that I think we probably need to have a conversation outside of this meeting in the next week or two to start getting some traction behind. There's quite a few areas of interest, groups of interest, residents groups we can tap up, young persons groups we can tap up, and quite inclusive groups that we can look at. I'm not too sure. I just see a hand up from another member. I'm not too sure if you want to jump in, councillor.
It's just, I had a direct email from a constituent of mine who is on the IAG, who would be interested in at least feeding into the work that the panel does. She's a young LGBTQ member of the IAG. She's a resident of, in fact, she's not a, blimey, I'm using the old ward boundaries. She's a resident of East Acton now, but she's very keen to share her work, even if it's maybe not as a co-operative panel that can be decided outside of this meeting. But if I could forward on, you know who I'm talking about, I think all three of them. But I think she'd make an excellent co-operative. Thank you.
Sorry, but I think what perhaps we want to know, it's part of what the panel needs to consider and agree is co-option. So it's yes or no. Apart from these two, there's this. Is done. Okay. The work in progress on. All right.
So that is a work in progress, but there was a second question from you, Chair, I think as well about the field work. And I think the timetable for that we're working towards is as soon as we're back into the month of September, that's when we would like the field work to start, because we accept the fact that August is not an ideal time, probably for lots of you, particularly those of you with families and maybe some holiday plans, I don't know. But also August is a pretty busy month for the police because they have holidays too sometimes, but also because a lot happens in August in London. It's a busy time. And so September would probably be the more appropriate time. Also, the schools are back. And so getting engagement from young people from the schools is going to be much easier in September. So that's the timetable we're working towards, if that's okay.
I think it's also worth noting that in consultation with Sean, we need to come up with the different opportunities and aspects that members could go and view, because particular members might have an interest in a particular area of work or particular type. So it gives you guys a degree of discretion to kind of look at the bits that you're most interested in, so you can get a bit of insight, because we've spoken about lots of different stuff tonight. So some councils might be more inclined to go to a particular operational kind of delivery or training or whatever it has. So we can kind of draw up a suite, I suppose, between now and September that Sean thinks, and in consultation with Sean Wilson, and then give you guys some opportunity to kind of nominate who would like to go to what. That makes sense, I think.
Yep, absolutely, from my perspective. And whilst I'd love it to be Ealing focused, obviously Ealing is one part of the Met Police, and as we've already heard, structurally it may lend itself to going elsewhere to see how that operates and cooperates with Ealing locally, whether that be some of our control rooms or whether it be some of our outreach events and what we're doing centrally. So yeah, look forward to that. Thank you. And again, Chair and everyone, thank you so much for having me tonight and for giving me the opportunity to discuss the new Met for London plan.
Thank you, officers, for coming. And thank you for my members. Because the date of next meeting is 31st of October.
Halloween.
And we have it.